The first light of dawn stretched thin fingers across the Dakota Territory, touching the weathered face of Eleanor Blackwood as she stood at the edge of the pines. The townsfolk of Whispering Creek called her many things, which madwoman wolfed never to her face. Fear had a way of breeding courtesy, even among the cruelest of men. Her dark hair, streaked with silver like the coat of an aging wolf, hung loose around shoulders draped in deerskin worn smooth by years of wilderness. "They're restless again," she murmured to no one, her eyes tracking something invisible in the distance. The wolves had been circling the northern ridge for 3 days now, their howls carrying messages only Eleanor understood. 20 years in, these mountains had taught her their language: grief, hunger, warning, celebration. But this was different. This was summoning. The townsfolk crossed themselves when Eleanor passed. Mothers pulled children closer, men touched their pistols, but Eleanor barely noticed anymore. The whispers followed her like shadows. Mad Eleanor talks to wolves. Mad Eleanor dances with spirits. Mad Eleanor lost her mind when they hanged her. Lakota husband. What the townsfolk didn't understand was that madness had never been affliction. Clarity was. Clarity that burned away the comfortable lies that allowed men to sleep at night. "Miss Blackwood." The voice belonged to young Thomas Wells, the shopkeeper's boy, breathless from running. "Sheriff says to tell you stay away from the Hardwick property. New owner don't want nobody trespassing." Eleanor's eyes narrowed. Hardwick land's been empty 15 years. Got bought some rancher from Kansas, building a big operation. Thomas shifted uncomfortably. "Sheriff says especially you ain't welcome." "Does he now?" A thin smile touched Eleanor's lips. "Thank you, Thomas." The boy lingered, curiosity battling fear. "Is it true about the wolves?" "What do you think, Thomas? Pa says you just feed 'em so they follow you." "That ain't talking." Eleanor crouched to the boy's level, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Your PA ever hear what the wind says when it moves through the pines? Or what thunder's telling you before the storm breaks?" "Everything speaks, Thomas. Most folks just forgot how to listen." The boy's eyes widened. "What are they saying now?" Eleanor looked toward the distant ridge, her expression darkening. "They're saying someone's disturbed what should have stayed buried." After Thomas departed, Eleanor returned to her cabin, a solitary structure nestled against the mountain's flank, where wilderness claimed dominion over man's feeble attempts at civilization. Inside, bundles of dried herbs hung from rafters stained dark by decades of wood. She gathered supplies: jerky, water, a knife with a bone handle, and her father's old Spencer rifle. A sunset painted the sky in violent hues. Eleanor made her way north, toward the Howling. The Hardwick property, once the proud holding of a cattle baron who'd mysteriously vanished, had stood abandoned since Eleanor was a young woman. The forest had steadily reclaimed it, year by year, root by root. The wolves found her at dusk, 3 gray shadows with amber eyes that reflected the dying light. They circled her once, twice, then the largest pressed its muzzle against her hand. "Show me," she whispered. They led her through thickets and ravines, across forgotten hunters' paths, to where a massive oak had stood for centuries. But now something was different. The earth around its base had been disturbed, heavy equipment, leaving ugly scars in the soil. The old oak had been partially uprooted, its massive root system exposed where excavation had begun, and there, between the gnarled fingers of wood that had once clutched the earth, something pale gleamed in the moonlight. A bone human. Eleanor knelt beside it, her weathered hand hovering above what appeared to be a forearm partially revealed by the disturbed soil. "So that's what happened to you, James Hardwick," she murmured. "Not run off to California after all." The lead wolf whined, pressing close against Eleanor's side. "I know," she told it softly. "This changes everything." In the distance, lights from the new construction illuminated the night. Men's voices carried on the wind, along with the sound of machinery and hammering. The new owner was working through the night, racing to build his empire on stolen land that held secrets Eleanor now understood had been waiting 15 years to be revealed. She stood, brushing dirt from her hands. "Come morning, they'll find out what their diggings uncovered, and then we'll see who's mad." The wolves circled her once more before melting into the darkness, their message delivered. Eleanor looked down at the partially exposed remains, her expression hardening with resolve. "Rest easy, James," she whispered to the bones. "Your killer won't sleep much longer." Chapter 2. Shadows of Buried Truth. By noon, Whispering Creek was alive with whispers. Sheriff Dawson had been summoned to the Hardwick property at first light, and the news spread faster than wildfire in August. Human remains found where the new rancher's men were clearing land for cattle pens. Eleanor watched from the edge of town as men on horseback galloped toward the site, their faces grim with purpose. "They're saying it might be old James Hardwick himself," Mrs. Porter hissed to her companion as Eleanor passed the general store. "Buried all these years, right under our noses." "Murdered," her friend gasped. "What else? Man doesn't bury himself." Eleanor allowed herself a thin smile. 15 years of speculation about James Hardwick's disappearance, dailies of him absconding with a saloon girl, fleeing debts, or starting anew in California, and now the truth was emerging from the soil like a stubborn seed finally breaking through. The new owner of the Hardwick land stood on the porch of the sheriff's office, tall figure carved from hard living and harder ambition. Nathaniel Harding had the look of a man accustomed to bending the world to his will. His clothes were finer than most in Whispering Creek would ever own, but dust clung to them all the same. No man could entirely escape the earth's claim in these parts. "Miss Blackwood," he called as she passed. "A word, if you please." Eleanor paused, studying him with eyes that gave nothing away. "Mr. Harding, you know my name. Everyone knows your name." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "The sheriff tells me you was seen near my property last night. The wind blows where it wishes." "Mr. Harding, as do I. The wind doesn't carry a rifle, ma'am." His voice hardened. "Nor does it have a peculiar interest in a grave disturbed on my land." Eleanor met his gaze without flinching. "Peculiar interests are what madwomen are known for, aren't they?" Something flickered across Harding's face, not fear, but wariness. Good men like him weren't used to being challenged, especially by women they'd already dismissed as lunatics. "They say you talk to wolves," he said more quietly. "They say many things about me." "And what do the wolves say about me, Miss Blackwood?" Eleanor stepped closer, close enough to see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. "They say you've come looking for something besides cattle land, Mr. Harding. They say you knew exactly what lay beneath that old oak." Color drained from Harding's face. "Be careful with accusations, Miss Blackwood. Madwomen sometimes meet unfortunate ends. So do men who bury their sins to shallow." She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. "I was 10 years old when James Hardwick disappeared," he said, almost too soft to hear. "Remember that before you spin your tales." Eleanor felt the weight of his words settle between her shoulders as she walked away. Something didn't fit, and the wolves had sensed it too, their unease palpable in their restless movements that evening. While shadows lengthened across the valley, Eleanor returned to her cabin to find Sheriff Dawson waiting, hat in hand. "It shouldn't provoke Harding," he said without preamble. "Man's got influence that reaches all the way to the territorial governor." Eleanor hung her shawl on a peg. "Did you identify the remains?" "Doc thinks it's Hardwick based on height and that Goldtooth been there a long while." The sheriff shifted uncomfortably. "Eleanor, there's something else. We found a second body." Her hand stilled. "Where same grave? A woman. Native, by the looks of what's left." The world seemed to tilt beneath Eleanor's feet. A certain long black hair, beaded dress. Dawson watched her carefully. "You know something about this?" Eleanor turned away, hiding the tremor in her hands. "Perhaps you should ask Mr. Harding. Seems he's the one with all the answers." "Harding wants to know how you knew where to look. Says you led the wolves right to the gravesite." "The wolves led me, Sheriff. There's a difference." Dawson sighed, a sound heavy with years of weary tolerance. "Eleanor, I've let you be because you keep to yourself and do no harm. But this is murder we're talking about. 2 murders. And you think the madwoman did it. Is that why you're here? I think you know more than you're saying." He placed his hat back on his head. "Council's called a meeting tonight. Harding wants to hire men to hunt down those wolves of yours. Says they're a menace to his operation." The threat hung in the air between them, unspoken but clear. The wolves were Eleanor's only family now, her only connection to a world that made sense. "The wolves harm no one," she said. "Tell that to men who've lost calves." Dawson moved toward the door. "Whatever you know, Eleanor, now's the time to speak it, before things get ugly." After he'd gone, Eleanor sank into her chair, memories washing over her like floodwater. The second body she'd suspected, feared, but now confirmation cut through her like a blade. She closed her eyes, seeing again the face of Morning Flower, who had vanished the same summer as James Hardwick. Morning Flower, whose brother had taught Eleanor the language of wolves before he was hanged for a crime he didn't commit. 2 bodies, 1 grave, she whispered to the empty room, and a man from Kansas who claims to have been a child when it happened. Outside, the first howl rose from the ridgeline, a mournful sound carrying across the valley. Eleanor listened, her head tilted. They were calling her again, but this time the message was clear as daybreak. Danger comes. The killer walks among you. Eleanor reached for her rifle. Tonight would bring no sleep, only vigilance. And tomorrow, she would need to discover what connected Nathaniel Harding to 2 15-year-old corpses before he silenced both her and the wolves forever. Chapter 3. The Price of Blood. And Mia Morwood on broke reluctantly over Whispering Creek, as if the sun itself hesitated to illuminate the town's secrets. Eleanor stood on the ridge above Hardwick's property, watching men with shovels excavate what had become a proper gravesite. The territorial marshal had arrived from Bismarck the previous evening, a development that had visibly unsettled Harding. 3 more, whispered Thomas Wells, who'd slipped away from his father's store to find Eleanor. They found 3 more. Bodies under them roots. Eleanor's breath caught. Who don't know all of M1's engine like the woman. One's Chinese, they think. The boy's eyes were wide with a terrible excitement. Only the young could feel it. Horror. Marshall says it's the worst burial ground he's seen since the war. 5 bodies now. A cold certainty settled in Eleanor's bones. This was no random killing ground. This was execution with purpose. Her fingers found the small leather pouch at her neck, touching it for strength. "Thomas, I need you to carry a message." She pressed a folded paper into his hand. To Sarah Redhawk at the mission school, no one else. Tell her it's about morning Flower. The boy nodded solemnly and disappeared down the path. Eleanor turned back to Wardtown, her steps heavy with purpose. She needed to see the bodies to know if her suspicions were correct. The doctor's office was crowded with men when she arrived, the marshal, Sheriff Dawson, the mayor, and Harding himself, deep in heated discussion. They fell silent when Eleanor entered. "This is a private investigation," Miss Blackwood, the marshal said, stepping forward. "I must ask you to leave." "Let her stay." Harding's voice cut through the tension. "After all, she and her wolves found them first. Perhaps she can identify our dead." The challenge in his eyes was unmistakable. Eleanor ignored him, moving instead to the shrouded forms laid out on tables. "May I?" she asked the doctor, who nodded. Reluctantly, she pulled back the first covering, James Hardwick, his remains partially mummified by the soil conditions. The second was Morning Flower, recognizable by the remnants of her beaded dress and the copper bracelet still circling her wrist bone. The third was a Lakota man Eleanor had never seen. The fourth, a Chinese worker who had once run the laundry, before disappearing one winter. The fifth, ... Eleanor single quotes as hand trembled as she revealed the fifth face, or what remained of it. Even after 15 years, she recognized the silver concho hat band. "Joseph Black Elk," she whispered. "You know him?" the marshal demanded. "It was my brother-in-law." Eleanor's voice was steady despite the storm inside her. "He vanished the same summer as the others." Harding moved closer, his presence like a shadow at her back. "Interesting that all these disappearances connect to you, Miss Blackwood." Eleanor turned, facing him directly. "They connect to Hardwick land. Your land now, Mr. Harding. Land I purchased legally, having no knowledge of its grim secrets." "No knowledge." Eleanor's laugh was brittle as winter ice. "You arrived in Whispering Creek with a map showing exactly where to dig. You knew precisely which oak to uproot." The room fell silent. Harding's face hardened to granite. "That's quite an accusation from a woman who communes with wolves." "The wolves remember what men choose to forget." Eleanor looked around the room. These people didn't simply disappear. They were killed because they knew something about Hardwick's mining interests in the Black Hills. Sheriff Dawson stepped forward. "What mining interests?" "Hardwick was a cattleman. He was prospecting illegally on Lakota land," Eleanor said. "Morning Flower discovered it. Joseph was helping her gather evidence. The Chinese man Lin Wei worked as Hardwick's translator with foreign investors." The marshal studied her intently. "And how would you know all this, ma'am?" Before Eleanor could answer, the door burst open. Sarah Redhawk stood there, her mission school dress incongruous with the fury in her eyes. "I have the ledger," she announced, holding up a weathered book. "My mother Morning Flower, she hid it with me before she disappeared." Harding moved with unexpected speed, lunging for the book, but the marshal was faster. "I'll take that," he said, his hand now resting meaningfully on his sidearm. Eleanor watched Harding's face as the marshal opened the ledger. The careful mask of the businessman slipped, revealing something ancient and terrible beneath the face of a predator. "Cornered." "My father's name is in there," Harding said quietly. "Edward Harding, Hardwick's business partner in Denver." "Your father?" Sheriff Dawson echoed. "The man who sent his son to recover evidence that could destroy him even 15 years later." Eleanor's voice was soft but carried to every corner of the room. "The man who likely ordered these killings." Outside, a wolf howled, a single mournful note that seemed to penetrate the walls themselves. Eleanor felt it resonate in her chest like the toll of a bell. "Arrest her," Harding demanded. "She's clearly involved." The marshal closed the ledger. "I think not, Mr. Harding. These financial records show illegal mining operations on treaty land, with profits divided between James Hardwick and Edward Harding of Denver. Given the timing of these disappearances and your convenient arrival, I believe we should continue this conversation at my office." As Harding was led away, his eyes locked with Eleanor's. "The wolves won't save you," he whispered. "When my father learns of this, he'll burn your world to ashes." Eleanor watched him go, the weight of 15 years of waiting lifting from her shoulders even as a new dread settled in its place. The wolves had shown her where to find the dead, but the living were still dangerous, perhaps more so now that their secrets were exposed. "The wolves aren't meant to save me," she replied, though Harding was already too far to hear. "They're meant to ensure justice remembers what men bury." Chapter 4. What remains beneath the image? On 3 days passed, like shadows across Whispering Creek. The territorial marshal had taken Nathaniel Harding to Bismarck for questioning, but Eleanor knew better than to believe justice would come so easily. Men with money rarely paid for their sins in full measure. Snow fell on the third nightly for October, a whisper of the harsh winter to come. Eleanor stood on her porch, watching white flakes dissolve into the darkness. The wolves had been silent since the bodies were discovered, as if waiting for something Eleanor couldn't name. "He's coming back," Sarah Redhawk said, appearing like a ghost from the trees. "Edward Harding arrived by train this afternoon. 6 men with him." Eleanor nodded, unsurprised. "The father comes to clean the son's mess." The marshal released Nathaniel. "Insufficient evidence, they're saying." Sarah's voice cracked with the same rage that had hollowed her mother's grave. 15 years, and still they protect their own. Inside Eleanor's cabin, they spoke in hushed tones by lamplight. The ledger had vanished from the marshal's office, stolen or simply misplaced after Edward Harding's arrival. Without it, the case against father and son was crumbling like dry earth. They've offered Thomas's father money to testify that you confessed to the killings, Sarah said. They're building a case against you. Eleanor's laugh held no humor. The madwoman who speaks to wolves. An easy tale to sell. We should leave tonight. My cousin in Canada would know. Eleanor's voice was soft but final. Running gives their lies the weight of truth. Dawn broke with the sound of horses. Eleanor had been waiting, the Spencer rifle across her lap, when Sheriff Dawson knocked at her door. Eleanor Blackwood, he called, his official voice unable to mask his shame. You're wanted for questioning regarding the murders of James Hardwick and for others. She opened the door to find not just Dawson but Edward Harding himself, a man whose elegant clothing couldn't disguise the predator beneath. 6 hired guns flanked him, with Nathaniel slightly behind, his eyes fever bright. Miss Blackwood, the elder Harding said, tipping his hat with mocking courtesy. Your reputation precedes you, as does yours, Mr. Harding. Eleanor stepped onto the porch, rifle held loose but ready. Denver's merchant prince, builder of fortunes on stolen land and buried bodies. Careful, he smiled, showing teeth to perfect to be real. Such slander could add to your troubles. Truth isn't slander. Sheriff Dawson stepped forward awkwardly. Eleanor, please, come peacefully. We'll sort this out. Will we, Sheriff? Like you sorted out the missing ledger. Harding's smile never wavered. Unfortunate that documents disappear so easily in these frontier towns, much like people. A tension stretched between them, taut as a hangman's rope. Dawson's hand hovered near his pistol, though whether to draw against Eleanor or protect her, she couldn't tell. The wolves know where the bodies are buried, Eleanor said quietly. All of them. Something flickered in the elder Harding's eyes, a momentary fracture in his certainty. Nathaniel wasn't the first son you sent to bury your sins, she continued. Was he, Edward? Father Nathaniel began, but Edward silenced him with a gesture. My patience wears thin, Sheriff, Harding said. Arrest this woman, or my men will. Before Dawson could respond, a long mournful howl rose from the ridgeline, then another and another, until the air vibrated with their chorus. Every man but Eleanor flinched, hands moving to weapons. They're coming, she said simply. Wolves don't attack armed men. Nathaniel scoffed, but his father's face had grown ashen. These aren't ordinary wolves, Eleanor replied. These are the ones who found what you buried 27 years ago in Colorado. Edward Harding's composure cracked. What do you know of Colorado? I know you had a partner there too, a man named William Blackwood. My father. The revelation landed like a thunderclap. Dawson's eyes widened in understanding. Your father died in a mining accident, Harding said coldly. My father died with a bullet in his back after discovering your theft. Just like James Hardwick died when he threatened to expose you. Just like Morning Flower and the others died for knowing too much. Eleanor raised the rifle slowly. The difference is, my father taught me about wolves before you killed him. The howls grew closer. At the edge of the clearing, amber eyes appeared, then 7, then more, watching in silent judgment. Shoot them, Nathaniel shouted, drawing his pistol, but the hired guns hesitated, counting the wolves now visible among the trees. Marshal, a voice called from the path. The territorial marshal appeared, flanked by 6 deputies. Edward Harding, Nathaniel Harding, you're under arrest for the murder of James Hardwick, and for others. On what evidence? Edward demanded. The marshal held up a familiar leather-bound book. This ledger, which your son was seen attempting to burn at the hotel this morning, and the testimony of your former associate in Denver, who's been quite forthcoming since we wired him about the bodies. As the Hardings were led away in irons, the wolves melted back into the forest, their purpose fulfilled. Eleanor lowered her rifle, feeling the weight of 27 years begin to lift. Your father, Sheriff Dawson said quietly. That's why you came here. That's why you learned to understand them. Eleanor watched the wolves disappear, her companions in a justice delayed but not denied. The wolves, remember, she said. And now, so does the law.